Porsche 911 992 received a lot of praise from the press, yet value development is disappointing when compared to previous generations. What's up YouTube and welcome to a new video. Now during the last few weeks we had a detailed look at the 996, 997 and 991 Carrera market. And to be fair, values were really impressive. The 996 market saw for example an increase of 40%. As you probably guessed, in this video we will figure out if the same goes for the 992 market. On top of this, we will also have a look at the underlying market characteristics to see how this young market evolved in such a turbulent time. Demand is extremely high and supply for most models is extremely low. Yet, before we dive into the details, let's first have a look at today's 992 market and see how it relates to all the other generations. Over here we have the US 911 Carrera market split by generation. The horizontal axis displays the model year and the vertical axis the price. Each car is displayed by a bubble, and the black axes show the median price point for each model year. And this graph shows only the base and the S version for the coupes and the cabriolets. So what do we have here? Well, obviously, the newer the generation, the higher the price. The 996s tend to go for $33,000, the 997s for $55,000, the 991s for $95,000 and the 992s for $145,000. So those are jumps of $22,000, $40,000 and $50,000. And naturally, the newer the car, the larger the price difference. However, maybe you already saw that there are also large differences within the generations. Let's identify those. It is evident that the .2 version for each generation fetches a large premium. Look for example at the price difference between the 991.1 and 991.2. A 991.2 will set you back $110,000, while this is $82,000 for a 991.1, and that's a jump of $28,000. And you can also see that this difference decreases when the cars get older, yet it remains a significant factor. You can then also see a big jump between the 997.1 and 997.2 generations, but that's perhaps for a good reason. The 997.2 is frequently quoted as the pinnacle of the 911s. But let's zoom in now a bit to the 992s. This is a video about the 992 generation after all. You can see that there are currently 249 cars for sale and that these tend to cost $145,000. Now interestingly, the median mileage is quite high in this market as it sits at 4,000 miles. And that also has something to do with the uneven spread between the model years. Most cars are namely from 2020. And that is unusual for such a young car market. We are now approaching the end of 2021 and typically you would expect the most recent model years to be filled with the new cars. In fact, as I will show you now, there are only 20 new cars listed for sale, and this also explains the relatively high mileage. Undoubtedly this is linked to the high demand and the shortages in the chip sector. If you read through the various Porsche forums, you will find many frustrated owners who saw their expected delivery days pushed backwards. Porsche did then also report an increase in delivery times resulting from the shortages. Moreover, they even said that they would deliver cars with placeholder chips just to reduce the delivery times. I'm not sure if that affects the Carrera models, but it's certainly an interesting approach. Now there are of course many additional ways in which you can look at this market. We can look at the S versus the base models, the coupes versus the cabriolets, the two-wheel drive versus the four-wheel drive cars, and various combinations of those splits. However, before we look at those, let's have a look at the value development during the last 9 months. Over here you can see now the date on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. You can also see that prices went up with 11% or $15,000 between December 2020 and August 2021. However, this is a bit misleading. It also includes the new cars. If we look at the development of the ratio between the used and the new cars, then we can see that there are significant changes. In December there were 282 new cars for sale versus only 20 now. Total market supply did then also decrease from 424 cars to 249 cars. And that's a drop of 41%. Not something you typically see in these young markets. Ironically though, used car supply is up by 93 cars. And all of this means that it's perhaps fairer to look at the price change for the used cars. So let's do that. We can see now that the price change is slightly lower, as it sits at 8% or $10,500. In December the median price was $136,500 and now it sits at $147,500. Although that this increase is slightly smaller than the increase for the complete market, it's still statistically confirmed. And that means that it is unlikely to be the result of chance. But like we already discussed before, we can break down this market into a lot of categories, and this might be relevant here. If we have a look at the Porsche website, you can see that there are large price differences between the models. So let's start by having a look at the differences between the base and the S models. Over here we can see now that both markets developed approximately the same. The S increased slightly more as prices went up with 11.6%, whereas this is 8.8% for the base. If we also add the roof type to the split, we end up with the S cabriolets, base cabriolets, S coupes and base coupes. Unfortunately though, a consequence of looking at this detailed split is that the number of observations per group reduces quickly. Nevertheless, we can see that approximately the value developments are the same in each market segment. The S cabriolets seem to have increased the most, but this predominantly results from the underlying market characteristic. The mileage increase is the lowest in that market segment. When we correct for that, all of these segments increased roughly with the same percentage. So what about the two-wheel versus the four-wheel driven cars? Let's have a look at that. You can see now that the increase for the four-wheel driven cars is 9% and that this is almost identical to the 8% increase in the two-wheel driven market. So I think that the message behind all of these graphs is clear. Prices increased across the board. There isn't a particular market segment which is driving the increase. Alright, we are now quite familiar with the 992 market and how the prices changed in that market. But there's a reason as to why this video is called Why the 992 is the worst 991 to own. And naturally, let me point out that you shouldn't take the worst literally here. However, if you compare the price increase in the 992 market to the price increases in the other 911 markets, you will find that it falls short. Let's have a look at that now. But before we do so, if you like this video, please click on the like button down below as it really helps to support the channel. Thank you. Over here we have now in red the 992, in green the 991, in blue the 997 and in orange the 996. And all of these markets include only the Carrera base and S version. Now we already saw that the 992 went up by 7.7%. Yet, the increase in the 991 market is almost double of that, as prices went up by 15.6%. Moreover, if we go back even further in time, till December 2019, this number increases till 20%. But that's of course not a fair comparison. Now if we look then at the 997s, we can see that they increased with 18% and that this is 30% over the last 16 months. However, the absolute winner of this game is the 996. Since July 2020, prices are up by 42%. And this also translates to a large increase between December 2020 and now. Prices went up by 18%. So here we have it. The price increase in the 992 market was clearly the lowest of the bunch, and from that perspective it was the worst one to own. The 996, 997 and 991 all went up with 18 to 20%. But this is quite interesting, isn't it? Before I made this analysis, I started out with the hypothesis that the older 911 saw a larger price increase than the younger ones. And based on the data between December 2020 and now, this clearly is not the case. Yet, if we go back further in time, we might find some evidence which supports the hypothesis. But that's perhaps something for a different video. Let's go back to the graph now. We can namely see in the most recent 996 data that the price trend starts to flatten. In fact, between May 2021 and August, prices increased only by 1%. But this increase is not statistically confirmed, so in essence prices didn't move. And this in turn is in line with the used car market trend and the underlying market characteristics of the 911 market. Over here we have again the development of supply, the median mileage and the median model year. And we can see that in all markets supply decreased. Especially the 911 market saw large fluctuations. Supply decreased from 461 cars to 205 cars and is now again up at 336 cars. And based on this, I wouldn't be surprised to see a flattening in the price trends akin to what we saw in the 996 market. And with that, let's wrap up and conclude. We saw that supply in the 992 Carrera market reduced drastically and that there are almost no new cars listed for sale anymore. Of course, this is not unique in the current environment as many manufacturers are struggling with the chip shortages. Porsche reported that this led to an increase in delivery delays and this seems to be confirmed by the various messages on the Porsche forums. Yet, the price increase is rather limited. All other generations increased by 18 to 20%, whereas the 992 saw only an increase of 8%. And also compared to other cars, this increase is relatively small. So based on the price increase alone, the 992 was the worst 911 to own. And with that we arrive at the end of this video. Now if you like this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would have liked to see the analysis for a different car, Let me know down below in the comment section for which car you would like to see an analysis. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I will make a video about it. Also don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell so you will be actually notified when your requested analysis goes live. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.